Welcome to Scigest, your fortnightly serving of digestible science from plant and food research.
Kia ora and welcome to this edition of Science Life for Me series of Scigest. Well, we should be really introducing today's guest with some of the same flashing lasers, dry ice and explosions that her live shows are famous for. But sadly, the Scigest budget only stretches to a 20-cent party popper. So Michelle, in your honour, this is the pyrotechnics.
Woo!
Hopefully the audio of that is good. Today we are talking with nanotechnologist and science communicator Dr. Michelle Dickinson, aka Nano Girl. Of course, her CV is anything but nano in scale. It includes nanotechnology research, the starring role in a live science show, and has more awards than the last edition of the Golden Globes. Okay, thanks for joining us today, Michelle.
Kia ora, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
That's no problem. Thanks for coming. I know you're an incredibly busy person, and I actually had to have a lie down after reading your bio and your webpage. And what we want to know first up is, did you actually give yourself a holiday over the Christmas break?
No. However, what is a holiday? I think holidays are where people take breaks from things that they don't necessarily like to do every day. Whereas I'm really lucky that I get to do things that like bring me joy every day. So I didn't need a holiday. I worked through, but I was doing some cool stuff because we're launching some really exciting things this year.
So it's kind of an upscale staycation where you don't just stay at home, but you keep working as well.
Do you know, my holiday? So last year I spent 194 days on the road, being back in Auckland where I live and just nutting all the emails out that I had to do was actually what I needed to do. So it was great.
So that is a break then.
Definitely.
Cool. Let's get the tricky stuff out of the way first. Now, it says you're a nanotechnology scientist. Now, for those people who don't know from outside the area, what is nanotechnology?
Sure. It's wrong, by the way. I'm a nanotechnology engineer, and I don't care about those things. But scientists are always like, she's not a scientist, and engineers are like, she's one of us. So I have to clarify that I'm a builder of things. Nano is just a size scale, so you have a meter, centimeter, millimeter. You can go all the way down to a nanometer. And if you are not follically challenged, take a look at the width of your hair right now, and you should be able to see how wide your hair is. That is 100,000 nanometers wide, give or take. And so I build and break things that are about 100,000 times smaller than the width of your hair.
So you work with stuff you can't see, essentially.
Totally, which is awesome, because you just have to believe that I do it.
So is this all science fiction writing stuff, or do we use it in real life? Give us some examples.
We definitely use it in real life. I became a nanotechnologist because of science fiction, because I loved the Borg Queen in Star Trek and watched way too much of it. And so there are applications everywhere. Those of us who are older may remember that sunscreen used to be white, and you could tell when people had sunscreen on their face because you'd see a white sheen. And that's because the titanium dioxide particles in there were bigger than nanoparticles. They were microparticles, and the light would bounce off, so you could see it. All we've done in sunscreen recently is make the particles much smaller, so they're micro and nanoparticles. You can't see them, so it's invisible, but you're still getting the same sun protection on your face. Great example, if you've shaved any part of your body today, you might think you're shaving with steel, but actually on top of the steel is usually a DLC coating. It's diamond-like carbon that is sprayed on top of that, gives you a much closer shave, somewhere between 6 and 12 nanometers of diamond, and it does wear off. So when your razor blade is getting blunt, it's usually not the metal getting blunt, it's the diamond carbon that is wearing off. So those are two examples of how you've used nanotech today. Obviously, it's in your smartphones and all your devices, but yeah, in really common household items too.
So it's something that I guess most people can relate to. Now, there's lots of stuff with nanotech gimmicks and the marketing lines and stuff. Does that kind of stuff annoy you as someone who's a serious operator in this area? Or is it?
I love that people are using the word. I was at the Auckland Home Show recently, and there was this guy trying to sell me a shower cleaner. So you spray it on and you don't have to wash your shower. And it said, powered by nanotechnology. And I was like, yes, this is the product for me. So I walked up to him and said, oh, tell me about your product. He's like, oh, it's very complicated. It's powered by nanotech. And I was like, oh, try me. And he said, oh, well, nanotechnology is smaller than a flea.
The flea scale, the common flea scale.
That was the only explanation I got of how it worked. Yeah. And I was like, why, thank you, sir. I really feel like I know a lot about your shower product now. So a lot of people use it and they know it means that it is more powerful or provides some sort of coolness. And I kind of like that the word means cool.
It is kind of very in vogue at the moment, but I guess when you were at school, nanotech probably wasn't on the radar.
No.
Was there even a word then? Maybe not.
Oh, so it was coined in 1974. So it was around when I was around, but I'd never heard of it before.
So what were your early thoughts in terms of where you wanted to end up. Can you remember?
Do you know, I didn't. So my father was in the Royal Air Force, and so I grew up around military planes and helicopters, and so I'd always seen myself joining the military, I think, because that's what my dad did, it's what my granddad did. Everybody I knew was in the military, all my friends' parents were in the military. We just moved from base to base. So I think I saw myself joining the military growing up. And then I thought about becoming a doctor, because when you're a kid, people give you labels for jobs that are good. And doctor sounded like a good one, taking care of people. And I actually did work experience in the Air Force to become a doctor, and I realized that I don't like people. So that was a really, really easy way for me to, at least process of elimination, decide what I didn't want to be. They just seemed really whiny and just complaining all the time, and I was like, I can't deal with that. So so I didn't really know what I wanted to be. I sort of just knew what I didn't want to be. Not very helpful, was it? But I knew what I liked doing. So I knew I was terrible at history. I didn't care about kings or queens. I went to high school in the UK. Just wasn't interested in dates or kings. I loved practical stuff. I loved metalwork. I loved woodwork. I loved geography when we went out and collected rocks. So I realized I was a hands-on person, and I liked building and breaking things at home. And I hoped that one day that would turn into a job, but I wasn't sure what. And I remember filling out a form at school where you had to fill in, it felt like 100 different boxes, and they put this form into a machine that told you what your dream job would be. Mine was fish farmer.
Fish farmer?
I
Where do you
don't
think
know
that came
why.
from?
I've no idea. I couldn't imagine being outside farming fish. But yeah, and I was like, do you know, I just don't think it's for me. So I was really confused. I had no idea what I wanted to do as a kid.
Were you one of the sort of academic elite at school, or were
No,
you
I was
kind of
rubbish at school. I was rubbish at school. My parents, neither of my parents have high school education, and so academics and education wasn't that important to our family. We didn't have a house full of books or anything like that, and I didn't know anybody who'd ever been to university. Nobody in my family had. My grandfather left school when he was 10. So I didn't really understand that side of academics. I knew what I liked in school and I was naturally good at, but I wasn't very good at reading or writing, which made me very slow in school. And I think that's why I liked hands-on things. So I did terribly at school. I failed high school, and I worked in a shoe shop. So that was fun. Oh, you want the rest of the story, don't you? So obviously, you know, I have a PhD. I worked in a shoe shop for a while, working minimum wage, and through a whole bunch of opportunities and luck, I got to meet some people who saw my skills. One thing I was really good at is if something was broken, because I didn't grow up with much money, if something was ever broken, I learned how to fix it. So my dad was a tinkerer, he was an avionics engineer, and he taught me how to just figure out how circuits work and how to fix things that are broken. And I carried that skill set through to when I was working in this shoe shop, and somebody brought something in that was broken. I said, oh, give it to me on my lunch break and I'll probably be able to fix it for you. And I did. And I didn't realize that this was magical for them, because they were able to, I think it might have been a toaster or something, take it back and use it without buying a new one. And then lots of people started bringing things on their lunch break to see if Michelle could fix it. And apparently I could. And so somebody saw that skill in me and said, why are you selling shoes when you can magically fix things? And it wasn't something that had ever been celebrated in school. Nobody said, you're a great fixer of things. They said, you're terrible at these exams. And it's the first time I felt like I had a value that I could give, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so somebody introduced me to a polytechnic university. I only thought there was one type of university. I thought they were all the same. But they said there are different types, and some of them help you use your hands more than writing, and the others are very theoretical. So in the UK, there's this process called clearing. It's a very UK-centric thing where basically people who fail school get a chance to go to university. You're put on probation, and if there's any space left, they'll throw you in. And so I got into a university, a polytechnic one, to get into engineering via clearing, which meant that I didn't need the grades to get in, and they tried me for a year, and I thrived because it was all about making and breaking stuff, and it was what I was good at. So yeah, felt very lucky to have had some guidance from people who worked in a shoe shop and knew some people to point me in the right direction. Yeah, so then carried on doing that. And
so at that point, did you feel like something click in terms of like this is where I belong in the world and this is where I'm at?
All made sense. So I ended up studying materials engineering and specializing in fracture mechanics, which is basically what things are made of and how to break them. And I was in my element because I'm not very good at putting things back together, but I'm really good at smashing them apart. And so that's what I did for 4 years. I just broke things open, smashed them apart, ceramics, metals, polymers, you name it. I broke it. And then you sort of pass it over to a mechanical engineer who's supposed to put it back together. And I'm like, cool, that's not my job. I'll go break something else. And I had a great time. I couldn't believe that this was actually a thing and people were going to be paid in their lives to just break stuff.
No, not can I. I'm stunned that that you don't have
mechanics,
to put things back together again.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I definitely found my space. And, you know, I was probably in my late teens, early 20s before I actually felt like I sort of knew that I'd fit here. And that's why I learned about the term engineering. It wasn't until I'd left school that anybody had said, oh, you're probably an engineer. And I was like, nobody's ever used that word with me. And to me, in my head, the word engineer meant something very masculine, you know, overalls and wrenches and oily and dirty. And that necessarily wasn't what it was. Just I hadn't heard the word in a context that I had seen myself in before.
Okay, so after you studied in the UK, you went over to do your PhD in the US, is that right?
So I had a little bit of an interim period where I worked in industry. I worked for a company that made super absorbent polymer, which is the stuff you find inside nappies.
Geez, I'm familiar with that one.
I loved it. We got to work on a new product at the time called pull-up pants, which is how do you make nappies suitable for toddlers? Because the problem with nappies is they're so efficient, is that your toddler who's trying to be potty trained doesn't actually know that they need to go to the toilet. So we developed this thing called delayed swell. Yeah, I'm talking about we today. You didn't expect that, didn't you? So delayed swell, which is basically where it would be wet for 30 seconds before it absorbed. And we just put a tiny coating on the polymer and it took a while to dissolve. And these pull-up pants, which didn't exist before then, was something really good for parents to potty train. And I loved it and it was amazing. And then I got promoted to adult incontinence.
That's a promotion.
Well, I was told it was a promotion and I didn't know what it meant because I'm, you know, late teens, early 20s going, yeah, got promoted. And then I realized I was going from baby wee to old person wee. And just thought, this is not where I want to spend the rest of my life. And so, because there was a sniff test involved, obviously, because it's all about can it retain the scent inside the polymer. And I remember sniffing wee thinking, no, I'm good. This is not where my life was going to go. So I ended up going to my fourth year advisor for my undergraduate and being like, I don't know what to do with my life, but I feel like I need some guidance. And actually the company I was working for at the time got taken over by a very large German chemical company who had very strict rules. And the rules meant that I wouldn't have qualified for my job. They said, oh, the only people who can be senior scientists now in our structure are people with PhDs. And I was like, cool, having no idea what that stood for. So I went back to my fourth year advisor and I said, do you do PhDs? And he looked at me, he's like, yes, we're a university. I'm like, oh, cool. I'm like, how do you get one? I'm like, because I was an academic. I hadn't heard the word before. I didn't even know what it stood for. And he said, well, okay. And he helped me look into some stuff. And he said, I could offer you a PhD. And what do you want to do? And I talked about my love of Star Trek and nanotech and stuff. And anyway, so ended up finding a space in America in a newly developed nanotechnology research lab and moved over there and did a PhD in
Can you talk about your PhD topic or is it just going to blow half our readers away?
It's cool. So I was poor and I couldn't afford to do a PhD, so I had to do one that came with sponsorship, which meant I had to do one which was for a toothpaste company because they were looking for somebody to understand why does red wine and black tea make your teeth stain? And I'm like, I don't know, but you're paying me money and I will spend the next 5 years of my life finding that out for you. So I did a PhD in the acquired salivary pellicle. On top of your teeth at all times is this tiny protein layer that forms after you brush your teeth from your salivary glands, putting saliva over it. And it's the reason why your teeth don't crack. Because you imagine you've got unglazed plates smashing together, your teeth should crack. They don't crack because they have this little layer of protein as the squishy bit between them. That little layer of protein is also what plaque acid sits on, gets its feet into. That's how it sticks to your teeth. And also, I learned eventually in my PhD, tannins in black tea and red wine bond to this salivary protein and cross-link it, which means that the forces that have been put into toothbrushes and toothpaste is not enough to actually remove it, which is why they stain. And because they're cross-linked, they're harder. Your body recognizes it as a new surface and puts a new layer of protein on top, which then goes through the same reaction, and you end up with this black crusty layer on your teeth, which is why your teeth stain. And that's what I figured out. It was fun.
And did they figure out a way to remove the stain?
We figured out a way to remove stain, which has gone to that toothpaste company. I can't tell you who it is or what they did, but yes, it's cool. So I only use their product. And, you know, it's a really hard... So it was really interesting because it's the first time we realized, and I was able to visually show. So I used an atomic force microscope to show the shape of this protein layer changing. And also that the easy way to solve it would just to have toothpaste that's more abrasive. But then we showed that actually damaged the enamel. So you had to remove it in a different way. And it was really fascinating and really helped a lot of people gain confidence by bringing the whiteness of their smile back. And for me, it was a way to get a PhD where I was still paid through sponsorship in a project that was applied. And that's what I've learned, is that I'm a very applied engineer and scientist. I like to see what my problems are, or what solutions I'm coming up with for problems that I see affect a lot of people in the real world.
So it's fair to say you kind of sailed through that with a smile on your face compared to some PhD
and a lot
people.
of red wine, because to do this you have to have consistency, and so my lab had 2 crates of red wine from the same batch to make sure over the 5 years it was always the same wine. So yeah, I was that student.
Almost the dream project. Just chuck chocolate in there and you would have had the perfect thing. So you got through that, and was it straight to New Zealand after that point, or did you work through the US or
no? So I was when I was doing this PhD, I was using a very specific type of instrument called a nano indenter, which is basically a tiny little diamond that pushes into samples to measure its strength and its properties. And I found that the machine didn't do what I wanted it to do. Now, it was a very expensive machine, and I probably shouldn't have pulled it apart and rejigged it and made it better, but I did. And then the guy from the company came to do a service and saw what I had done to it, and basically it was bits of tinfoil sticking out, and it didn't look like the original machine. And he was like, "What have you done to my machine?" And I said, "I made it better." And he looked at it and he's like, "You actually have." And I said, "So now your machine, which wasn't designed to do anything in a biological environment, can now do an in situ biological 37-degree, anything you need in a biological fluid test," which had never been done before. And they said, "Cool, you need to come work for us." And I was like, huh. And I was only halfway through my PhD by then. So I was really interested in that. And so I ended up, literally, I defended my PhD on the Friday, and by Monday I was working for that company. And so I stayed in the US for a period of time working for them. And through them, I got all sorts of contracts, consulting for the big giants, IBM, Intel, Microsoft, 3M, doing some cool nanotech consulting work using those instruments and problem solving for some really cool corporates. So that was fun. And then, I was ready for what's next. So came to New Zealand.
So that brings up a good question, because you've got quite a global upbringing, I guess, moving around when you were younger, and you've got very international skills. I mean, you could use those in any country in the world. So we're a long way away from the sort of the hub of science, I guess, here in New Zealand. Why did you choose New Zealand?
Why wouldn't you choose New Zealand? Anybody who's here knows that this is paradise. I'm mixed race, so my dad is half Maltese and half English, and my mum is Hong Kong Chinese, and I've grown up all over the world speaking multiple languages and being part of multiple cultures. Now, that may sound rosy, and I used to move house every 2 to 3 years or move countries as a kid. But actually, I really found that people would say the words, "I'm going home for Christmas," and I had no idea what that meant. I had never felt a sense of home. I knew where my parents lived, I knew what country they were in at the time, but I never got a sense of what felt like home. And so I decided to go on a bit of a find yourself journey. I traveled around the world for a little bit, trying on countries to see if they felt like home. And that's what I did. I put 2 feet in New Zealand, and that was it. I just instantly, my shoulders dropped. I took a breath and I was like, "Oh, I found it. This is home. I have no idea how I'm going to get here or work here or any of those things. But this is definitely
It really just was a gut reaction.
My body just knew that this is where it wanted to be, and I had no doubt. And people thought I was nuts because I was leaving some of the biggest international corporates in the world to go move to this place that they knew was close to Australia but didn't actually know anything about. And I couldn't have been more delighted. So that's why I moved here. Literally that sense of wanting to feel like I was coming home to somewhere and not knowing where that place was.
So you were lucky, you did get a job. There was still science done in New Zealand at the Auckland University Chemical and Materials Engineering Department. So how long were you there for? Are you still there? I guess is my first question. Because
no, I'm not still there. I was there for just over 8 years, and I wanted to build a nanomechanical testing facility similar to what I had set up in the US, but I wanted to build the biggest and the best in Australasia. So when I moved to New Zealand, I was able to raise some funding and actually build what was at the time Australasia's biggest nanomechanical research facility. What I wanted to do is get some of those high net worth clients that I was working with the US to come and bring some of their research to America, and also allow our local students to get experience on big projects for big companies so that they could understand, even if you grew up in New Zealand, you can solve some of the biggest challenges in the world or in this space, especially the tech space, just from Auckland at the time. And so I did that for 8.5 years. And it's the first time I'd really, other than studying, ever been in the academic system. I didn't do a postdoc. My PhD was very industry focused and based. And sort of the first time I saw the inside of what academic life was like. And it is very different than my corporate life had been. And I think after 8.5 years, I can honestly say I really struggled with the transition. I'm quite a corporate minded person. I'm very focused on what are we trying to solve, how do we do it, how do we commercialize it, and academic research is all about blue skies research and some other things, and I was like, what do we do it? Where's the end? So it took a long time for me to focus, but I loved the teaching. I loved the teaching side of it. So I stuck with it probably for longer than I should have because I really enjoyed teaching. And I think that's where my love of comms came from, which is also the teaching part of my heart. And so, yeah, and after 8.5 years said, you know what, this isn't a good fit for me. I'm not a good researcher. I need to figure out how to use my brain in a way that I think it works better in.
So you're kind of the flip side to many people in the university system who hate the lecturing but love the kind of blue skies research, I guess. But was there something that you did there that you're particularly proud of? Because I guess we all know about your outreach and your comms and stuff, but it'd be nice to talk about something. Yeah.
So building a nanomechanical lab is pretty fun. Trying to get the best equipment into one space was, you know, there's a lot of negotiating and hustling for that. And that was my business side coming in. I mean, we did so much surface science. I was really interested. So we were using femtosecond lasers to modify surfaces to make them hydrophobic or hydrophilic. Basically, make a surface totally waterproof, or the opposite, which is have this tiny film of water on there. And we were creating surfaces that, you know, would stop planes needing to be de-iced in the winter, which is a terrible pollutant. And so I really loved being able to modify an existing surface so it behaved really, really differently. And we did that for many different applications, including the medical industry, so that body fluids didn't stick to things. There was less risk of getting infection from surfaces, so that, you know, proteins didn't stick to medical devices, so that they stayed cleaner and less risk of infection. So I really enjoyed that side of it. And we were able to build probes. I mean, the weirdest things. I was able to create a device that measured the friction of a contact lens blinking on an eyeball. And that might not matter to people unless you wear contact lenses and you know that dry eye feeling. And that dry eye feeling, from the research we were able to show, came from your contact lens going from 86% hydration to 85% hydration.
Really?
And it's like 1 percentage point, but we were able to show that by creating this fake eyeball and creating a sliding device that literally showed you and was able to measure, because it's a tiny friction measurement, what that measurement is as a function of humidity. So little things like that don't seem big, but actually help a contact lens company really make sure that they can stop that dry eye scratchiness in the lenses was what we did. So we did a whole bunch of cool, interesting stuff. That was probably my biggest problem as an academic, is I wasn't very focused. People were like, Michelle, you're not focused enough. And I'm like, I like solving all the problems. I like how my little niche can actually solve so many different problems. But when I look at other academics, they literally have one question for the whole of their life. And that's what I think I was supposed to do. It just wasn't the way my brain worked.
Yeah, it was kind of hard to work out from your publications list, because you have so many different collaborations with different people. It's like it's
all over the place.
There's medical stuff, there's physical stuff, and
yeah. So my papers are all over the place, and people are like, you need to be a PI on something. You know, a PI is person in charge, and primary investigator. And I'm like, I don't want to be the person in charge, because they do that for the rest of their life. I want to be the helper buddy who helps them get that paper over the line, and then I can help the next person. And I love that, but the academic research doesn't promote that way. At some point, you're supposed to take hold of the thing and do it by yourself, and that's cool. It just, wasn't what I wanted to do.
So you went from talking to students as a lecturer to, I guess, talking to the outside world in terms of like talking to the media and people. So what was the first big break that you got to do that? The first thing that happened is I was asked to give a TEDx talk in Auckland, and it was awful. I was petrified. I'd never given a public talk in my life like that, and I was so scared. And I was the first talk, and it was 2,500 people, and it was ridiculous. And I thought it went terribly. And then I watched it go out on YouTube, and actually lots of people watched it, and people who had been at my talk said, it was amazing. And I was like, it was awful. They're like, no, I really liked it. I'm like, it was terrible. And so you go through this thing where you think it was the worst thing ever, and yet people still liked it. And from there, I saw something from the Science Media Centre come out, which was for a course called Science Media Savvy. And it was all about how do you improve your communication skills. And I thought, this TEDx thing went so terribly. I feel like I might try and go on a course to do that, help me with those skills. So I got accepted, I went on the course, and that changed my life. Because from there, as part of the course, we went to a TV studio. We went to TVNZ, and they showed us around. It was the first time I'd ever been to a TV studio. We got great advice from journalists about, how to make sure you speak in sound bites. And then at the end of our course, I was really lucky. I was one of the cohorts where TV3 said, we heard you just had this course. Would anybody on that course like to do some TV? And so the Science Media Centre basically volunteered us all. And so we did. Every week, we would rotate, and we would do a science news segment on TV for TV3. And it was just us who were on the course who got to do it. And so that really opened not only my eyes, but helped me get some experience around TV and media. And it was shockingly awful as we started, but it taught me actually how to say what I want to say very quickly in a way that can't be edited in a different way, which is what tends to happen. And I thought, this is a really interesting skill set. I'm going to keep trying to work on this and just throw myself into any place I can that gives me different experience. So radio versus TV, live versus pre-recorded, podcasting, you name it, I'm going to try and do it, because every time I do it, I'll learn something, and maybe it'll help me bridge this huge divide that I was seeing between academics and the rest of the world. And it is a huge divide where, the ivory tower exists and the jargon around science and technology and engineering. You don't realize when you're in it that you actually sometimes speak a different language. And the rest of the world, the public, the general public who may not have advanced degrees in nanotechnology, have no idea what you're doing, and yet you're trying to do it for them. The language that scientists use is impenetrable, even to other scientists, I guess, let alone members of the public who have no background in it. But you've obviously learned to walk that tightrope between making the facts kind of accessible to everyone, but also keeping them as facts and keeping them real. And is this something that you think you've got an innate gift for? Because I guess you could spend a lot of time trying to learn this, but it would still be a challenge.
I thank you for saying I have an innate gift for it. There's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes. I think it's because I'm not a good reader or writer. I think it's because I've always tried to express myself in a way that I didn't have to write down. And so I've always thought about how do we communicate in a way that doesn't need written words. And so I think that skill of being not very good at reading and writing at school actually is probably my gift, which, although didn't help me in high school, has helped me to think about explaining things. And I tend to use props if I can to explain concepts that can be quite complicated in a visual way that you can see. And I'm also very selective. You'll notice that I pretty much never talk about astrophysics or space. There are some things that I just don't get, that are really complex, and actually you don't have to. You can make a few fundamental mistakes, not realize you make them. And so I don't talk about things that I really have very little confidence or knowledge in. Because, as you saw, my research is very broad. I did biomedical as well as materials engineering. Actually, a lot of the stuff I talk about tends to be related to things that I have at least done in my research or understood the fundamentals of. But I never claim to be an expert in those things. I claim to be a translator, if I can say that, to help just remove some of the jargon and explain what was already explained just without the long words in them.
I guess one of the unusual things about you is that you don't like public speaking. You've come from a background of hating it.
It's the worst.
And I guess in superhero terms, you've taken your kryptonite and turned it into a superpower. And most of us take our kryptonite and try and get it to somewhere near average or tolerable, get through the day kind of stuff. It's a really tricky thing to do. I mean, Superman never managed it. So what key part of your personality do you think was key to this?
Okay, so if anybody wants to take this, please take it, because I don't want to do it anymore. No, look, it's a really strong drive in me. And the reason is that because I am a high school dropout, and I see a lot of young people around the world who aren't performing academically very well, who, like I did, are feeling like they're failures in a system that measures academically. I really wanted to help people to feel like they were successful in different ways. And so my drive around this is to hopefully become a role model that says, do you know what? School wasn't for me either, but just because school wasn't for me, it didn't mean that I was not smart. It just meant that the system measures success in a way that didn't fit my brain type. And so I hope that there are others out there too who didn't go through the traditional system, who felt like they were failures growing up, who actually can show that you can be a success via a different pathway. And here's the pathway I took. Maybe there's a pathway for you. And so I do this, and I try to have a voice, because I didn't see that voice being represented, especially in the academic world, for people who hadn't performed well academically, who were able to find later on in life that they still had skills to give.
So it's all about sort of passing down your experience and to people that maybe don't fit into the traditional model of you're going to become this, you're going to be a genius at this kind of thing.
I mean, if you're great at school and you pass all the exams, good on you. Life is going to be, I think, easier than for those of us who aren't good at school and didn't pass all of our exams. And I don't think people often tell their journey story, especially when they failed, about how they then succeeded for them. And so I wanted to be a role model for those who maybe, number one, hate public speaking, but are sometimes up there doing it and know the sneaky ways that we can survive up there and hopefully thrive up there. Because I saw so many people give public talks, and I was like, you're such a great speaker, but your content is awful, because you were almost so confident you never had the nerves. So you didn't take it as seriously, I think, as somebody who is so nervous. You literally have sweat every detail, and your talk is beautifully curated. And as I was studying people who I loved to hear speak, and I researched them, I found that my favorite speakers were always introverts. And I was like, because I'm a weird, socially awkward introvert too. And when I read about it, it was like, because you don't want to give that talk, you'll spend so much time making sure it's perfect. Whereas if you are a more confident extrovert, you might feel like you can get up there and wing it because you're charismatic, and so therefore your content isn't as beautifully created and you haven't spent as much time on it. And so for me, the power of being an introvert who doesn't like the public space, but feels like I have maybe something to give and is waiting for somebody to take my space so I don't have to do this anymore. That's sort of what keeps me getting up and doing this. And, you know, the fan mail I get, the letters from people saying, I saw you give this talk and it's changed my life, or it's given me this confidence, is what drives me to keep putting myself in a place that I'm not very comfortable.
And you've had like an amazing journey on the way too, with some incredible stories and met some great people. And I guess one of the things that must have boosted your profile was spending some time with Sir Richard Branson on his private island in the Caribbean, which was made for an excellent story, I guess.
Yeah, and look, I've been really privileged to meet some of the world's most interesting people. Here's the thing. So Richard Branson is dyslexic. And so he, on his island, was looking for some solutions that use nanotechnology. For example, they have nothing on the island, so you need fresh water, and he has a desalination plant. He needs power, and so he has solar panels, and he was looking for somebody to help explain to him what the best technology was to use and why. And he had another nanotechnologist on the island at the same time who brought all of his papers and documents and texts, and I brought 3 ping pong balls, and I basically said, these ping pong balls are your atoms, and I moved one ping pong ball from one side to the other and said, so the problem is this atom is over here and you want it to be over there, and that was it. And he's like, oh, I get it. And that was sort of the start of a relationship that has lasted until, still today. I've been out to the island quite a few times, and I feel incredibly privileged to have done that. But it's how do you explain complex science in a way that somebody understands? And so for Richard, being dyslexic, he doesn't want nanotechnology papers. He just wants somebody to visually show him what the problem is and how to fix it. And I think that's been my superpower in life, is being poor at reading means that I'm always looking for ping pong balls and other ways of explaining complex things in a way that I don't have to make you read a complicated paper.
Okay, some celebrities perhaps not so well-meaning. How annoying do you find on a scale from 1 to 10 the celebrity lifestyle well-being bloggers? Case in point, I guess Gwyneth Paltrow's
Don't even mention, don't give her the click. It's awful. So it's really challenging, and some of the things that she and other celebrities are putting out there. I mean, we've seen some really terrible endorsements about anti-vaccination, especially in the Pacific Islands recently, from Australian celebrities who are claiming that, vaccinations are killing babies, all of those things. It's really hard, and I find it a real struggle. And the problem is the media works in a way that if you make things simple to understand and beautiful, people believe them, and people think that it's going to make them beautiful. And some of the things that are being pushed that I think are pseudoscience, I think can really be dangerous. The challenge that we have is we don't have great science communicators who are willing to put themselves out there in the same beautiful media-filled way that can compete with that. And we know that beauty sells. We know that, the glossy magazines are selling that lifestyle. And so some of these celebrities are trying to sort of use scientific words that actually are totally made up to sell products and make money. And I think it's a real struggle, but I'm not sure scientists are able to compete in that world.
And I guess there's kind of a shortage, like you said, a shortage of people wanting to do this. And is that because there's a bit of a downside to this kind of doing this comms? Because science is so highly territorial. There's a lot of professional jealousy. And the minute you start talking about someone's subject area, some other academic comes crashing down on you and say, well, what do you know? You've never done a degree in this. Do you get a lot of that?
I get a lot of that. People are mean. When I was an academic, somebody walked into my office and said, hey, Michelle, because I was doing something I was trying to explain engineering to high school students, and I was creating this little online video, and they said, hey, Michelle, if you want to teach high school students, you should just become a high school teacher and stop wasting your time here at a university. And he walked out, and I was like, okay. I carried on doing what I was doing, thinking, really? Is this what you actually believe? I had a Prime Minister's Science Communication Prize, and I'd won it the night before. I'd flown straight in from Wellington. I'd gone straight to the office after a little bit of media that morning for Breakfast TV. I put it's a very heavy ornament. I see you have one downstairs, by the way. It's very heavy, as you know. And I put it on my shelf and I was doing some work. They came into my office. They picked it up. It was very heavy. They put it down. They looked at me and they said, it's not like it's a real award anyway, is it? Implying that because it wasn't for research, it doesn't count for academics. And then they left. And I just thought, wow, what do you get from telling me that it's not good enough, And I just thought, this is the world that we live in, and I can understand why there are lots of scientists who don't communicate, because it doesn't take much of that to make you think, this isn't for me, my skin isn't thick enough, I'm just going to carry on doing what we're supposed to do, which is just research things and be quiet and publish papers. And so I choose to leave the system, which is sad. But I also had to put up with an awful lot of negativity, as well as some great positivity. Don't get me wrong, there were some amazing champions for the work I was doing. But there were definitely territorial, as you said, naysayers, always trying to tell you that you weren't the right person to be saying the right thing at the right time. Because they didn't understand that science communication isn't just about knowing stuff, it's about communicating stuff.
So probably was an important part for your decision to leave the university in retrospect?
No, I mean, I'm slightly ADD. So it'd been 8.5 years and I was definitely ready for the next thing. And it was the longest job I'd worked in my whole career. So I was definitely also at that point of, cool, life is short. What's next?
Speaking of what's next, do you ever get time to, you said you didn't really have a vacation, but what do you do to switch off from this sort of roller coaster of stuff you're operating in?
I take 2 weeks a year for me, off the grid. So I go with my girlfriends from around the world and we pick a place in the world that we want to learn from and we go hiking. So last year I went to the Alps, to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and I lived with the indigenous Berber women for 10 days. And I lived a totally nomadic life. I learned to speak Berber. I learned how to milk a cow. Incredible. So I went back to the indigenous roots of what is one of the most ancient civilizations and ancient languages in the world and did that. The year before, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, long way up. Takes a while, off the grid. So I tend to take 2 weeks where I'm totally switched off and just let my brain rest, but my body be incredibly physical. So I'm tired every day and I'm just doing something that isn't my day-to-day comms. And I hang out with incredibly smart women. One of them was an ex-rocket scientist at NASA. And we just talk about, fundamental physics on our way up a mountain. So that's what I do. I take girlfriend time for me and we just go do something physically active and outside of what we would normally do. So I think it's really important to step away and turn off digital devices and all the other things. And I'm not very good at that, so I physically force myself. We're just planning our trip now. This year we're going to Mongolia. We're going to go live in a village in Mongolia for 2 weeks. We're just making those plans. So that's what I do for fun.
That's an unusual selection of downtime activities. So you don't take your phone with you, is that right?
Don't take our phone with us. Yeah,
that's very disciplined. Yeah, that is off time then. Okay, finally, we're going to do some live science right here on Science Live for Me. And being fairly lazy, I've simply pinched an idea from your YouTube channel.
Cool.
Called Chicken in a Cup.
Yes! I love this one.
Don't freak out, listeners. This isn't some new innovation in factory farming. No chickens will be harmed. But we've got some stuff we prepared earlier because this is the magic of audio. We might get you to talk us through how to make one. It's pretty simple.
Okay, so the reason why I love this experiment is because I realize that a lot of people don't understand the science of sound. How is it that sound gets to our ears? We hear things all the time, and yet we don't know how that works. And sound is just a vibration, and it's very hard to explain that. And I think this experiment explains it beautifully. And so you have in front of you an empty container. Plastic containers work the best. And then you have a piece of string and a stick or a twig or something. And I like this too because it's also an engineering experiment because you create something new out of rubbish, basically.
Yeah, it's upcycling.
So you have an empty, what is that, a yogurt container?
That is a yogurt container, natural yogurt, only the best here.
And then you have a piece of string and a stick on the end of it. So the stick tied to the end of the string becomes what we call an engineering brace. It stops the string. So we've put a little hole in the top of our container that is big enough for a piece of string to come through. And if you kept pulling the string through, obviously the string will come out the other end. So you tie a little stick on the end and it acts as an engineering brace to stop it going all the way through. So you have yours through your end there?
I do. Mine is pre-tied. Didn't trust myself to do this on air. So, yep.
Perfect. And then we know that sound is caused by vibration, and we can create vibration in lots of ways. So one way is by taking our hands and rubbing them together, creating friction. And you know that you've created friction because you can hear it. And also your hands get hot.
And heat. Yeah.
And so kids love this because they can feel the hands getting hot, and we can talk about how it's creating energy. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create friction now by sliding our fingers, for example, or a tissue against the string. And it just makes a really annoying scraping sound. But we can change that friction. And if we change that friction, we change the vibration that we're making by making it wet. So you have a wet paper towel over there?
I do, yes.
I'm going to do this with my fingers. I'm just going to wet my piece of string here. And now when you rub the two together, and all you've done is add a little bit of water, which has changed the friction, it should change the sound. to make the sound of a chicken. Now, depending on the size of your cup, it's either a chicken or a duck, or a really small cup, it's a kookaburra. And the magic here is actually it's the cup that is amplifying the sound, and it's doing that, number one, in the shape of the cup, sort of like a megaphone shape, and number two, because the cup is plastic, or you can use a paper cup too, it vibrates, and that vibration is amplified through the string, so the cup vibrates. And you know this because if I take the cup away and all I'm doing is rubbing my fingers against the string, you get a little tiny squeaky sound. Very, very quiet. So I love Chicken in a Cup because it has so many different scientific principles, and it's upcycling about how we hear different noises and how we can make different sounds.
And it works on podcasts, which is why I like it.
Hurrah!
Cool. All right. I think that's probably all we have time for now. It's pretty hard to top clucking plastic cups. So we'll end on a high. I'd like to thank our guest, Michelle Dickinson, for joining us here on scigest and talking about her journey into science and into science communications. I'd like to thank our listeners for listening, and please sure to post a review and subscribe to scigest on iTunes. Mā te wā.